"Don't sign that paper, Mr. Caldwell." The words came from the back of the room, small and clear, cutting straight through the applause. Everyone turned. Standing near the door to the hallway, still holding her mother's hand, was a girl no older than 8. She wore a yellow dress with a white collar. Her chin was up. Her eyes were fixed on the long oak table at the center of the room, on the documents spread across it, on the man leaning forward with a pen already in his hand. Harrison Caldwell straightened slowly. He was 63 years old, the kind of man who filled a room not by being loud, but by simply existing in it. 40 years in corporate law had given him a certain stillness, an economy of movement that people mistook for coldness until they sat across a negotiating table from him and understood it for what it really was. He did not rattle, he did not rush. And right now he did not dismiss. He looked at the girl. "Excuse me," he said. Her name was Tessa Okafor. She was the daughter of Nina Okafor, one of the paralegals who worked for Caldwell's firm, brought along today because the school had called a half day, and Nina had no one else to take her. She had been sitting quietly in the corner for the better part of an hour, coloring something in a notebook while the adults talked. Nobody had paid her any attention. "Don't sign it," Tessa said again. A ripple moved through the room. It was the kind of ripple that travels through a crowd when something embarrassing happens, and no one knows quite who is responsible for it. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Caldwell and Merritt was not the sort of place where children interrupted proceedings. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, a mahogany table that seated 20, carafes of ice water, spaced every few feet, and today 17 people seated around it for the closing of what had taken 14 months to negotiate. The Whitmore Vance Group acquisition, $380 million. The kind of deal that defined a firm's decade. Seated at Caldwell's right hand was Douglas Fenn, his longest-tenured partner, 61 years old, silver-haired, with the easy smile of a man who had survived enough to stop worrying. Across from them sat the buyer's representatives, led by a man named Reed Sutherland, sharp-faced, expensive suit, the sort of person who treated silence as a negotiating tactic. Around them were associates notaries, 2 men from the escrow company, a woman from the buyer's bank, and various assistants whose names Caldwell had not yet memorized. Nina Okafor stood and crossed the room to Tessa in 2 quick steps. Her face was tight with mortification. "Tessa, sweetheart, you need to sit down," she whispered. "I'm not moving," Tessa said. She did not say it with defiance. She said it the way a person states a fact they are entirely certain of. Nina crouched down. "Honey, this is not the time. Mom." Tessa looked at her mother directly. "I saw what he did." The room had gone quiet, not politely quiet, the kind of quiet that conferences produce when someone brings up a sensitive number. Genuinely quiet, the kind where you can hear the air conditioning. Douglas Fenn cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a short break." "That won't be necessary," Reed Sutherland said. His voice had an edge to it. Not quite irritation, not quite amusement. Something in between that was more unsettling than either. He reached for his water glass without looking at the girl. Harrison Caldwell set down his pen. He did not cap it. He set it down flat against the table, which was a gesture anyone who worked closely with him would have recognized. It meant he was thinking. "Tessa!" he said. "Come here!" Nina started to protest. Caldwell raised one hand, not dismissively, just gently, and she stopped. Tessa crossed the room. She walked the way children walk when they have decided something. Steadily, without looking at anyone except the person they're walking toward. She stopped at the edge of the table near Caldwell's chair and looked up at him. "What did you see?" he asked. "The man who was here earlier," she said. "The one who brought the papers in the blue folder." "Mr. Sutherland's assistant," Douglas said. "He came back," Tessa said, when everyone was getting coffee. "He came back and he opened the blue folder and he changed something. He used a different pen. Then he put the papers back." The room was so quiet now that someone's chair creak sounded like a door slamming. "That's a serious accusation," Sutherland said, and this time his voice had settled into something purely cold. He looked at Nina. "I don't know who this child is or why she's here, but I'd suggest you get her out before she does any more damage." Nina's face had gone pale. She was looking at her daughter, then at Harrison Caldwell, then back at her daughter. "Tessa," she said carefully, "are you absolutely sure about what you saw?" "I'm sure," Tessa said. "Children misinterpret things," Sutherland said. He was speaking to the room now, not just to Caldwell. He had the practiced tone of someone who had redirected conversations many times before. She probably saw Donovan organizing the documents. "We had several last-minute corrections come through this morning. It's on record. Nothing unusual." "What color pen?" Caldwell asked. Tessa blinked. "What?" "The pen the man used when he changed the document. What color was it?" Tessa thought for a moment. "Black, a thin one, like a felt tip. The normal pens on the table are blue." Caldwell looked down at the documents in front of him. The signature lines were marked with small yellow sticky arrows, the kind a notary places. He picked up the top page and turned it slightly toward the light. Douglas Fenn watched him. "Harrison, give me a moment." Caldwell turned another page, then another. His face gave away nothing. That was the thing about him that had made him one of the most effective attorneys in the country for 4 decades. He did not perform reactions. He simply processed. Reed Sutherland pushed back from his table slightly. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Caldwell noticed it. He had spent a professional lifetime noticing things people did when they thought no one was watching. "I'd like to call a brief recess," Caldwell said. "Harrison, we're already 40 minutes behind." "Douglas." His voice was quiet, but the sentence was finished. 15 minutes. People began to move. Chairs scraped back. 2 associates gathered laptops. The woman from the bank stepped into the hallway with her phone already at her ear. Sutherland remained seated for a moment, too long before he rose, buttoned his jacket with controlled precision, and walked toward the window. Caldwell stood and looked down at Tessa. "Will you show me?" he asked. "Where you were sitting when you saw this?" Tessa nodded and led him to the far corner of the room, near the credenza where the coffee service had been set up. There was a low chair there, backed against the wall, with a clear sight line to the main table and to the auxiliary door near the presentation screen, the door that Sutherland's team had used to bring in materials throughout the morning. "I was right here," Tessa said, coloring. "Mom told me not to move. I was being good." She paused. "I was going to tell Mom first, but she was in the bathroom and then everyone came back in too fast." "You did right," Caldwell said. He walked back to the table alone. The documents sat where he had left them. He picked up the clause summary on page 11, the one that defined the conditions under which the final tranche of payment would be released, and he read it again. Then he opened his briefcase and removed the working draft that had been finalized and approved by both parties at 11 o'clock the previous evening. The numbers matched, the language matched, everything matched. He almost put the page down. Then he turned to the indemnification clause on page 19. In the approved draft, the indemnification window was 36 months. In the document on the table, it read 60 months. It was 3 digits changed, embedded in a subordinate clause, on a page that would have been reviewed at 10 o'clock that morning when everyone was still fresh, when the final document was presumed settled, when no one expected to find anything. The kind of change that might have been called a clerical error after the fact. The kind that would have held up in court because it bore all the proper signatures. 60 months instead of 36 would have exposed Caldwell's client to an additional 2 years of liability claims. Potential exposure in the range of $40 to $60 million, depending on what surfaced. He sat very still. Then he pressed the intercom button on the conference room phone. "Ellen," he said to his assistant, "please ask everyone to return to the room, and please contact building security. I need someone on the 42nd floor before the recess ends." He set the phone down. On the other side of the room, Reed Sutherland was still standing at the window with his back turned, watching the city below. When security arrived, and when the building's internal camera footage from the secondary hallway was reviewed, and when it was established that a man named Donovan Price, listed as a junior associate on Sutherland's team, had indeed entered the conference room alone during the coffee break, and when Donovan Price was located in the elevator lobby with a carry-on bag that had not been there at the start of the morning, the meeting did not resume. It did not resume that day or any day after. What resumed instead, some weeks later, was an investigation that eventually established that Donovan Price had been placed on Sutherland's team specifically for this purpose, that Reed Sutherland had been operating under pressure from a third-party investor whose interest in the acquisition terms had never been disclosed, and that the indemnification modification was not the first attempt, only the first one that had been caught. None of that, however, was the story people talked about. The story people talked about was the girl in the yellow dress. Nina Okafor kept her job, though she would say later that she had fully expected to be quietly let go within the week, that the kind of disruption her daughter had caused was not the sort of thing firms forgave easily, regardless of the outcome. She said this without bitterness. She understood how institutions worked. She had spent 15 years watching them. Harrison Caldwell called her into his office on the Monday following the incident. She sat across from him at his desk with her hands folded, and her expression carefully neutral, the expression of a person who has decided to take whatever comes with dignity. He said, "Your daughter may be the most observant person who has been in this building in 30 years. Nina looked at him. "I've been thinking about how to say this," Caldwell continued, "and I've decided the only way to say it is plainly. If Tessa had not spoken up, I would have signed those documents. I've reviewed the clause 6 times since that morning. I would not have caught it, not before the end of business. The format was correct, the pagination was correct, the font was identical. Whoever made that change was meticulous. He paused. Your daughter is the reason this firm is not currently managing a catastrophic liability situation for our client. Nina said nothing for a moment. She's 8, Nina said. I know. She was supposed to be sitting quietly and coloring. I know that too. Nina's hands unfolded in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry in this office, and she kept that promise, but it was a closer thing than she had expected. Caldwell slid a document across the desk toward her. The firm would like to establish an educational trust in Tessa's name, enough to cover tuition through a 4-year university, with provisions for postgraduate study if she chooses it. He watched her face. I've also spoken with the partners about adjusting your title and compensation, which is long overdue and should have happened before now. Those are separate matters. The trust is for Tessa, because she earned it, and because the world should have more people like her in it. Nina picked up the document. She read it slowly, all the way through, which made Caldwell respect her even more. She's going to ask me questions about this, Nina said. She asks questions about everything. You can tell her. It's what happens when someone does the right thing, Caldwell said. She already knows that, Nina said. She did it because she thought it was right, not for any other reason. Caldwell nodded. That's exactly why it matters. Nina stood to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at him, and there was something in her expression that had shifted from the careful neutrality she'd walked in with. She told me afterward that she almost didn't say anything, Nina said. She thought maybe she had misunderstood. She thought maybe she would get me in trouble. Caldwell was quiet. She decided to say something anyway, Nina said. Because she said it would be worse not to, she left. Harrison Caldwell sat alone in his office for a while after that, with the Chicago skyline behind him and 40 years of his career in front of him, in the form of case files and framed certificates and photographs with people he respected. Yes, I can do that. And he thought about an 8-year-old girl in a yellow dress who had made a decision that most adults would have talked themselves out of. He thought about every room he had ever sat in where something had felt right, and he had let the momentum carry him forward because the moment was almost over, and the documents were already printed, and 17 people had flown in from 4 cities, and surely he had checked everything thoroughly enough. He thought about that for a long time. Donovan Price was eventually charged with fraud and document tampering. Reed Sutherland's involvement proved harder to prosecute but impossible to ignore, and the firm he represented dissolved within 6 months under the weight of the investigation and the departure of every client who could leave without penalty. The acquisition never closed. Caldwell's client found a different buyer on cleaner terms, and the deal that eventually signed 18 months later was, by most measures, better. None of the 17 people who had been in that conference room ever forgot the moment a child's voice cut through the applause. Several of them would say, in the years that followed, that they had been skeptical, that their first instinct had been to see the interruption as an embarrassment, as something to be managed and smoothed over, and apologized for on behalf of whoever had brought a child into a closing. They were embarrassed by that instinct later. Tessa Okafor, for her part, returned to school the next morning and did not speak about what had happened in the conference room, not because she'd been asked to keep quiet, but because she had moved on. There were other things to think about. A science project about water cycles, a disagreement with a friend about the rules of a game at recess. Regular life, the kind that 8-year-olds are properly occupied with. On the wall of her bedroom, her mother had pinned a small note that Tessa had dictated to her shortly after the incident, before any of the formal acknowledgement had come, when it was just the two of them in their apartment, and Nina was making dinner and Tessa was sitting at the kitchen counter doing homework. Nina had asked her carefully if she was glad she had spoken up. Tessa had thought about it for a moment in the way she thought about everything, with genuine consideration. Yes, she said, because the thing that was wrong was still going to be wrong whether I said it or not. I just had to decide if I was going to be the one who knew and didn't say anything. Nina had written that down and taped it to the wall. It was still there. 3 years later, the tape yellowed, and the paper slightly curled at the edges, when Tessa was 11, and beginning to understand, in a larger way, what it meant when she was old enough to see that the truth of what she had said applied to more situations than a conference room. On a Tuesday morning, when she started to understand that this was not a lesson she had learned from a book or a teacher, but one she had already known when she was 8 years old, and standing in a doorway in a yellow dress with her chin up, deciding. Harrison Caldwell sent her a letter on her 12th birthday. He wrote that he thought about that morning more than she would probably expect, that it had become something he returned to when he needed to remind himself what it looked like to be certain of the right thing. He told her that she had given him something he hadn't realized he was missing. He did not say what that thing was exactly, because he found it difficult to name precisely. But Nina read the letter after Tessa did, and she thought she understood it. She had felt it herself, watching her daughter cross that conference room. The particular clarity that settles over a room when someone does something honest, without calculation, without rehearsal, without knowing what it will cost them or whether it will matter. The clarity of a child who simply says what she sees, and means every word.